Hi everyone, welcome to week 5, module 5. We're going to be talking about the trauma narrative today. So let's real quick do a review of our flow of intervention. We assess, we are always assessing, right, for safety in a therapeutic relationship. And then we're going to look at the prac stage of TFCBT, which is that parent caregiver psychoeducation and parenting skills, relaxation skills for our client, right? Affect expressions and coping skills for emotions, and then cognitive coping part 1. So what is the goal of the trauma narrative? Why are we doing this really scary thing or asking our clients to do this really scary thing? The whole goal of the trauma narrative is to unpair thoughts, reminders, and to have a discussion of the event that those overwhelming emotions are associated with, right? So in SWK 684, and then the body keeps score, we learned about flooding, right? The flooding of emotions. We learned about the physiological responses that we have to trauma that are influenced by the hormones that are released from our amygdala, right? To tell us to fight, flight, or freeze, right? So we need to unpair those reminders from that overwhelming emotion so that we can manage them, right? So it's also to have that repeated exposure over time, because we know when we have that repeated exposure that the intensity of the traumatic event decreases. So I think it is in the video for today, or it could be in the book, where it talks about if someone watches a scary movie or reads a scary book, the first time you watch a scary movie, you're scared like the whole time, right? Because you don't know what's going to happen. But the more times you watch the movie, the less scared you are, or the less physiological responses you have. So the less jump scares you have, the less like you have, right? Because you know what's going to happen. So when we talk to our clients and to their caregivers about why the trauma narrative is important, it's because of that repeated exposure, right? This trauma that they've experienced, it's never going to go away, right? We're not asking them to forget it. We're not asking them to stay in it. Like, we're not asking them to do one of the extremes. We're asking them to come to this middle part that we know is a good place for them to be at. So it also is to replace dysfunctional thoughts, so cognitive distortions. We kind of talked about that in cognitive processing 1, but we will do that again as we go through the narrative. We as clinicians will be listening to and assessing for those cognitive distortions and for those negative cognitions so that we can reprocess them again after we go through this narrative. And like we said, we don't need them to totally forget it, but we don't want them to totally live in it their whole life. So we want to make it just part of their life. So how does the process of the narrative go? There's a great video to watch. The book has excellent anecdotes for the narrative process. And if any of you all do the TFCBT training online, they also have great resources for the trauma narrative. So the first step is to just introduce the child to the concept of the trauma narrative. And honestly, it's to introduce the caregivers also, right? Because we've had caregivers who are not like super on board with the trauma narrative. Like, well, why do you want to make him keep talking about it? He just keeps reliving it. Like, it's just going to make it worse. Yes. Yes. Yes, like everything you just said, right? So it is going to get worse. Like, we're going to look at this, prepare givers for potential spillage. It's going to get worse. And I've seen the get worse be like minimal, and I've seen it be acute, right? Just like the perception of trauma, it's different for everyone because it's who experienced the trauma. The spillover is going to be different for each individual. So we're also going to allow the child to decide how deep into the trauma they're going to go, right? So we can challenge that avoidance with the story, but ultimately, who's in charge? Whose session is it? The client, right? It's the clients. So the second step is to begin the narrative. So just as it says in our text and as it in some of the videos that we've watched, you're going to start off just with some generic information. And this does work really well because it's not scary, right? It's not scary. So you're going to start off with like, how old are you? Where do you go to school? All of these additional things. I did want to mention real quick that while for the process of the narrative, honestly, first step should be checking in with your suds, right? Like what scale is this client at before we even get started, so we know where their emotional regulation is. And then it allows us the opportunity to check in as we go through the narrative process. Where are they on our SUD scale? Also, if we check in right away and they say they're already at an 8, what is that telling us about their brain? Like we're already starting to like boop, 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 boop. Our prefrontal cortex is getting like flying away because our amygdala is freaking out already. So we're going to check in, because if they say at an 8 before we even start the narrative process, what do we need to do? We need to do a relaxation exercise, right? So please first, honestly, I guess like sub-step 1, right? Do a SUD scale assessment. Okay, so we're going to start off with the generic information, and narratives can look like a lot of different things, honestly. It can be a picture book of drawings of a child who isn't old enough to read or write, and then you as the clinician can be the secretary and write the words down for them, right? The client can write their own book, or they can type their own book. I've had clients do trauma narratives where they do interpretive dance and they dance out that experience, and then we go back and talk about it, and boop, 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 we put it down. So I had a little guy who was a really good drawer. So we did like comic book cells. Remember, it's not about what we are most comfortable communicating, the style we are. It's about how's the client most comfortable recalling this narrative, right? And the first thing you're going to write about is just the event itself. The third step of the narrative process is that the child reads the narrative and then they add emotions and thoughts. So first step is kind of just like this objective vision, like they're watching it on television, what happens? And then you go back and you read it, and when the child reads it, then you ask them those thoughts, like, how did you feel when this was happening? Or tell me more about what you were thinking in your head. Things like that to help them. So what this is going to do is going to identify and describe those thoughts and feelings, right, that influence our behaviors. Some of the ways we can help our clients identify these is to talk about what was your worst moment or the worst memory. And we're going to add those to the narrative. What was it feeling? What was the feeling you were experiencing during that worst part? I know when we say feeling, like we think of like, I was feeling scared, I was feeling sad. I'm going to encourage you all to try to be as open as you can when these narratives are taking place, because still, right, people say feelings and there could be an identification of a physical feeling. I felt this person doing this to me, right? Completely valid. Not what we thought we were going to get, but completely valid. So please stay open and don't correct that person. That is a feeling, right? That was a physical feeling. So we could get emotions or we could get physical feelings. If they offer you a physical feeling, so you're telling me that your physical feeling was blah, 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 blah. What emotion were you feeling when that happened? Don't hesitate to bring out little feelings wheel, or if you have, like I have little feelings cards that we clip onto like a banner when they come in to talk about how they're feeling, a little check-in, to use those as reference if you need those as reference. And then again, we're going to use our SUD scale, right, to see where they're at and how can we utilize relaxation skills and coping skills, and even externalization exercises like Barbie dolls, right? We use those a lot in my practice. So the fourth step is that you praise the child at the end of each session, right? Session, right? We want to make sure that we are recognizing how difficult what they did, what they just did. Here's another good point for this too, is that this trauma narrative doesn't need to be 60 minutes, 30 minutes, right? We have to really let go of our limitations that we put on it regarding how much time, how much we think they need to tell us at one point, right? And what they should be saying to us. So I just encourage you all to do that. And it says again here, right, for the SET scale. So it's super important, y'all, that when we do a narrative, trauma narrative with our youth, or if we're working with adults and we're doing trauma therapy and they're giving us a trauma narrative, we want to leave ample time for that client to be able to re-engage their prefrontal cortex and their hippocampus, right? It's super important, and we want to make sure that we do that. So we do that a lot through with my kiddos, like my youth that I work with. We just turn on music and we dance, right? Or sometimes, depending on like if it's a hyper or hypo, right? If they've gotten really withdrawn because of their reminders of their trauma and they've gone into that withdrawal kind of like freeze stage, then we use dancing and music, right? Or we'll like toss a ball or do something physically, right, to help regulate up. If it's that they are like pacing and fidgeting and like they're in hyper, we're going to use something to help bring back down. So we'll use some kind of grounding technique or relaxation skill that causes us to take deep breaths and to bring our body back into the present, right, and out of the past. So we're going to look at this reenactment, re-experience, and release. So the first stage of post-trauma is reenactment. This is where it comes into repetitive play, right? We see this as a trauma symptom if we go through for criteria for PTSD. So it's repetitive, joyless player behaviors. So they might not even know that they're doing it, and it's usually pretty self-focused. So we recognize reenactment by reflecting on, is this behavior or play that this client is exhibiting making a positive change? And if not, then it's most likely a reenactment. For the second stage of post-trauma is re-experience. So they can express a traumatic event without feeling irrationally responsible for having caused the event, right? So irrationally responsible, what is that? That's a cognitive distortion, right? And then the third stage is release. So this is where that client can discuss, they can talk about, they can remember, they can play that event out with puppets or dolls, and they can do that without feeling completely overwhelmed. So they're not flipping a lid, they're not flooding, right? And they can recognize and understand that that is what happened in the past, and it is no longer an immediate danger, right? Again, when someone engages in trauma therapy, TFCBT, we are not asking them to forget their trauma event. And it is not saying that they're not going to feel an emotion. What does it say? Without feeling what? Without feeling completely overwhelmed, right? Is it saying without feeling sad? No. Is it saying without feeling like, bleh? No. It's saying without feeling completely overwhelmed. And second part is what? Understanding that it's a past event, right? So clients a lot of times will be like, well, when I think about it, it still makes me sad. Yeah. It should make you sad, right? Like that thing that happened, that is sad. What do you do when you're feeling sad? How many domains of their life, how many areas of their life is it affecting when they're feeling sad? Is it overwhelming? No, they just feel sad. Okay. You're allowed to feel sad, right? Like you're going to feel sad. These next things are just stated interventions for re-experiences and release. These are all wonderful things that I utilize all the time. Again, they just depend on who your client is and what works best for them. So it's okay. These right here are going to be resources that help you to psychoeducate parents, caregivers, clients that it's okay to feel those feelings still, right? This is exactly what I was talking about. So again, please, please, please utilize all these resources. If you have the ability to download them onto your computer or into a thumb drive, please, please, please do it because they are just awesome, awesome resources. Again, we talk about EMDR in here, which we should not utilize unless we are completely trained and certified in EMDR. All right, y'all. So you have your weekly activity, which is due by Sunday. Your supplemental training assessment is due by the end of week 6. So it actually opened up today too, since it's a core assignment. And please watch the documentary Wrestling Goats. I can't wait to kind of maybe talk about that a little bit next week. Please reach out to me anytime if you have any triggers. Y'all are doing amazing. Thank you again for letting me be part of this journey with you and for sharing things with you. I hope you all have the week that you need, and we are almost through. Rock on, y'all. Have a great week.